today's speaker. First of all, can everybody hear me? No? And is that better? And second of all, it's really great to see so many people here. I've shut this door because it looks as though we're going to be a cosy group today. As for those of you who don't know the news, it looks as though Australia has won the America's Cup. And on what better note to introduce our... Excuse me, I was just leaving. I'd like to introduce Tania Amochaev, I've been practicing that name, who is the Vice Principal of Applications and Professional Services, International Division, Controlled Data, and in Minneapolis. And a little biographical information, because sometimes I think people find that interesting. She was born in Yugoslavia of Russian parents and came to the US some years ago and grew up in San Francisco. She attended Berkeley as an undergraduate, where her major was mathematics, and then went on to do a Management of Science a Master of Science degree in Management at Stanford University. She has been with Controlled Data for the last 13 years and started off as a programmer. She describes herself now as being involved with about 50% international and 50% national jobs. She is currently responsible for worldwide consulting. This is in 27 countries. Developing local businesses, applications, for example, Cybertel, which is the name that CDC has given to videotex. For those of you who have already looked at your proceedings, and I know that that's not always been possible for everyone, the title of her talk in the proceedings is The Productivity of Information. It's the same talk, basically, but it now has a title change, Information Services and Their Future. Welcome.
Thank you, Virginia. Can you all hear me? I have a written talk here, and it says, "It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today." And it even says, "Smile." But I want to know who scheduled this for 1 hour and 47 minutes after Australia, too, beat us to the finish line. I have two options to give you. I can either cut the last 42 seconds off of my talk, or I can simply cut it to 42 seconds in honor of this event. But I will continue with the talk. The topic I'm going to discuss is a familiar one to most of you. It's information services. Centuries ago, in 1776, Adam Smith, the founder of modern economics, published a masterwork that was entitled An Enquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. He considered the primary wealth of nations to consist of capital, manufactured goods, natural resources, and labor. But if Smith were alive today, I'm sure that he would place very near the top of his list information. Relevant, timely, and accessible information. Information for decisions that give direction and value to our natural resources, to capital formation, and to virtually every area of contemporary living. This, I'm suggesting, may well be the new source of wealth for nations today. If we think of information as a resource, something like one of our most basic natural resources, say water, then we can see and understand the fascinating parallels between this man-made, created resource, information, and the natural resource, water. First of all, both seem to flow continuously from numerous and all but invisible tributaries. Both are very useful when under control, but they're overwhelming if they flow too fast to be properly harnessed. And both have value only when they're presented in the right place, in the right form, and at the right time. And in fact, today, there seems to be a rising flood of data and information that we have to face daily and attempt to control. John Nesbitt, in a more recent book called Megatrends, asserts that we're drowning in information, but starved for knowledge. And I couldn't agree more. We see evidence of it daily in the deluge of magazines, reports, memos, and broadcast programs that engulf us. And in fact, it's attacking my in-basket in Minneapolis right now. Anywhere in the world today, we can pick up a newspaper or tune into television, whether to watch the race or anything else, and know that we've left the industrial age and entered the age of information. Visible signs of it abound in our offices, our homes, and our factories. A case in point was Time Magazine's Man of the Year for 1982. Since I bring it up, you probably assume that it was not a man of the year, but a woman of the year. In fact, no, Time transcended that issue, and it was the machine of the year, the personal computer. And the personal computer, the computer itself, to me is the bellwether of the information explosion. The words information industry are rapidly becoming a synonym for the computer industry. Therefore, it's critical that we in the computer industry understand the implications for creating new sources of wealth and power, and that we take full advantage of that understanding, both as providers and as users of information. Excuse me. That's my contact lens that just disappeared. See if I can do this blind. In order to gain insight into this new age of information, I'd like to cover three basic areas during my talk. First, I'd like to look at information as a resource. Secondly, I'd like to consider the ways to improve productivity through information. And finally, I'd like to review some of the ways that information can be transformed into knowledge through information services. First, let's look at information as a resource. We don't have to be keen observers to notice that our world is changing and that the rate of change is increasing. A century ago, fewer than 10% of the American labor force were performing information work. Today, upwards of 60% may be engaged in it. And similar gains in the number of information workers have been recorded in Europe, in Japan, here in Australia, and in other developed countries. American sociologist Daniel Bell looks at this transition from the industrial age to the information age and writes, "It is a rare moment in cultural history when we can self-consciously witness a large-scale social transformation like this one. Few people realized, when the Industrial Revolution was beginning, the import of what was taking place. And I believe few people realize today the informational analogy that is occurring." Most of us would agree that there are enormous opportunities for service, for profit, and for human achievement for those who understand and act on the opportunities of the information age. Those opportunities exist for those of us who are prepared to do things differently, to go beyond novelty, beyond the fast buck, and lead the way into the new era. The information explosion, or the exponential rate at which people are generating and gathering information, is evident and visible all around us in the vast amount of material we receive on a daily basis, and we instinctively feel a desire to absorb it all, but we really just don't have the time. And it's the gap between our desire and our ability that sometimes resembles a swamp of information. One way to harness the swamp, or rising flood of information, is through information services, the effective delivery of externally generated information. Our role here is to enhance the process by which that strategic resource, information, is turned into a new wealth, knowledge. Management expert Peter Drucker has said, the productivity of knowledge has already become the key to productivity, competitive strength, and economic achievement. Knowledge has already become the primary industry, the industry that supplies the economy with the essential and central resources of production. Our challenge then is to deliver information, information of value, information that is easily accessible, easily understood, and whose utility is increased by the ease of its manipulation. It is also information that must be precise, timely, and accurate. But I've mentioned information many times, and how do we define information? Daniel Bell, whom I quoted earlier, defines information as data processing in the broadest sense. Others define it as simply symbols. But regardless of how it's defined, it seems that comprehension itself marked the dawn of our information age. And today we're well past dawn by numerous measures: the spoken word, the written word, movable type, telegraph, telephone, computer, and now microcomputer are the benchmarks in the growth of information. So we have information growing around us, but our understanding of it as a resource is really just beginning. In a recent article, Harlan Cleveland, the director of the Humphrey Institute in the United States, discussed information as a resource and offered 6 inherent characteristics of information, which I'll discuss in a moment. First, though, Cleveland explained that information is not just another resource. It is unique. We have grown up thinking of business as built on resources as things. But the physical component of most business today is a small base for an inverted pyramid of organized information. Most people in business today focus on ideas, procedures, marketing, advertising, administration, and generally trying to stay out of trouble with consumers, with the law, and with regulators. So as we look at the characteristics of the resource information, we really have to keep in mind that the typical concepts which are appropriate to physical resources don't apply. For example, scarcity, or bulk, limited substitutability, trouble in transporting them, and the notions of hiding or hoarding information simply do not apply. Imagine then how these thing concepts, which are firmly fixed in our minds, hinder the productivity of information. Now let's look at those 6 characteristics. The first one is that information is expandable. Because information is expandable without limits, the facts are never all in. And the facts are available in such profusion that it is uncertainty which becomes the most important planning factor. Information doesn't just grow, it multiplies. Available scientific and technical data, for example, today increases at about 13% a year and doubles every 5.5 years. Soon the rate of increase is predicted to grow to 40% per year. And in fact, the only constraint on its growth is our ability or desire to record it. So the implication is clear. If there is no limit on the growth of information, what sense does it make to operate businesses or governments on the principle of allocating scarce resource? Is the value of information related to its quantity, or is it to its appropriateness to the problem at hand? Huge volumes of data can be accessed today, and mostly for fairly low cost. In fact, data has quickly become a loss leader, almost a marketing tool used to attract customers who will then purchase computer power to manipulate the data. And that leads me to my second point, which is that information is compressible. Paradoxically, this infinitely expandable resource can also be concentrated, integrated, summarized, and miniaturized, if you will, for easier handling. As the information resource is processed, nuggets of knowledge emerge, and they allow information to be stored in complex formulas, in manuals of procedure. The implication is that since information creates information, and information is the source of knowledge, the processed information is now worth more than the original information itself. And so the potential market for value-added information services is virtually unlimited. In fact, processed information confounds normal accounting methods which depreciate capital. I'm sure that eventually somebody will develop new accounting methods which appreciate information. You've probably heard some aspects of this in discussions of, for example, transborder data flow. Or how many of you have been stopped upon entering a foreign country by the customs agent who suspiciously asks you, when he learns that you're in the computer business, whether you have any hidden data on you? Third characteristic that I have is that information is substitutable. In defining it this way, the term means that information can replace capital, labor, or physical materials. Robotics and automation in offices and factories are displacing workers, thus requiring a transformation of the labor force. It is estimated that in the United States, more than 45 million workers by the year 2000 will be affected by the transformation from industrial to information work. Many of these workers will join the electronics business, central to the information industry. And it is estimated to reach a market size of $400 billion sometimes during the 1980s. In other words, this information industry could very well be the largest business ever created on this planet. It has also been pointed out that these new jobs of the 1980s really represent only the second stage of microprocessor technological innovation. According to author Nesbitt, there are 3 stages of technological development. First, the new technology or innovation follows the least line of resistance. Second, the technology is used to improve upon previous technologies, and this stage can last a long time. And finally, new directions or uses are discovered that grow out of that new technology itself. In other words, the first stage is random breakthroughs, followed by transformation, and then breakouts and future developments. For example, how many of us, on learning about microchips, imagined that they would be used in toys that would speak and spell to our children? Or who of us would want to predict the ultimate use for home computers? The future implications of the new technology are simply awesome. One of them is that millions of new jobs are on the way. And so education and job training, which are directed at narrow slices of learning, will no longer prepare someone for a lifetime of earning. IBM already spends over $500 million a year on employee training and education, retraining and re-education. Integrated thinking and knowledge skills will become much more important to the creation of wealth, and therefore more important to business and education. And these skills will be used with constantly renewed information to expand individual capabilities in an ongoing way. And education and training, when viewed this way, can also be seen as an information service whose database provides the constantly evolving educational material. Even though the labor theory of value, developed when thing resources were dominant, doesn't apply today, most economic analysts are just beginning to recognize knowledge as creating economic value. A new knowledge theory of value still remains to be developed. Characteristic number 4 of information is that it is transportable. It really travels at the speed of light, and perhaps even faster than that through telepathy. In less than a century, we've been witness to a major dimensional change in both the speed and the volume of human activity. A change in the transportability of resource that is greater than the multimillennial shift from foot travel to jet travel. As you're well aware, the transfer speed of precise information is changing the nature of work routines and the nature of decision-making, as well as enhancing economic activity. This development offers great opportunity for advancement, but it also provides greater pressure on workers to make instant or even pre-planned decisions. The implication is again that we're confronted with a swamp of information, but also by the collapse of our traditional information float. For example, the speed of information movement allows people to transfer money today to take advantage of higher interest rates, even for just a few hours. And so increasingly, we're going to require training, services, and mechanisms for adjusting our decision-making capabilities to this ever-increasing speed of information transfer. Information is diffusive. It leaks. And the more it leaks, the more of it there is. Information is aggressive. It's even imperialistic. It simply breaks out of its unnatural bonds, the bonds of secrecy in which thing-minded people try to lock it. So secrecy, property rights, confidentiality, all enshrined in Western thought and law, are not particularly effective constraints on information. The new United States copyright laws testify to our will to protect the authors and investors in our new wealth. But ongoing congressional investigations testify to the ability of the information resource simply to escape that protection. As we all know, information is positively self-generating. The more we know, the more we want to know. And it is synergistic. The combination of two thoughts may produce 2, it may produce 10, it could produce 100. Along with this, information is self-governing, and it frustrates attempts, especially in free societies, to control it externally. This confluence of traditional property rights concepts and the increasingly diffusive nature of information in the highly competitive international marketplace is likely to result in an explosion of new laws, new agreements and regulations, and an information service provider runs the high risk of being totally dependent on these privacy laws. Now, far wiser is the provider who adds sufficient value to her services to maintain the uniqueness. The last characteristic I'll cover is that information is shareable. Things are exchanged. If I give you a flower or I sell you a car, then you have that object and I no longer do. But if I sell you an idea, then we both have it. And if I give you a fact or I tell you a story, then it's like a good kiss. In sharing the thrill, we enhance it. The market is only beginning to adjust to the idea of shareable transactions. Something is still worth what someone else will pay for it, but that someone else is changing her definitions. The implication is that enormous markets for information services do exist, but in a marketplace that is still evolving an information-based theory of value. For an example, consider the popular computer games available in stores today. After the flutter of their initial introduction, their value drops, and they become basically a commodity-priced item. That is, they sell for little above their media value. What once had unique value has become ordinary and commonplace. Now, can you imagine high-powered mainframe computer software selling on a discount store shelf for $12? On the other hand, can you explain to a non-computer professional, someone like the customs agent, why one reel of tape is worth $20 and another reel of tape, which looks identical to the first one, sells for $100,000? And how long do you believe the $100,000 price can be maintained? And what is it based on? Is it based on the length of the program, the number of lines of code? And if so, then what happens if that expensive package reproduces subsets of itself and distributes itself to remote intelligent terminals? Now what is the value of that package? Overall, then, information is a very different resource. In its self-generating, expansionary, diffusive, and shareable characteristics, some see a democratization of wealth. Depending on your perspective, that may be a blessing or a threat, and it's reminiscent of the Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." For those of us in the information industry, especially in services, the coming age of information is a tremendous opportunity. An opportunity to be at the center of a process for turning information into knowledge and resource to wealth. The product of information is, as Drucker asserts, the central capital, the cost center, and the crucial resource of the economy. Armed with this knowledge, the question now becomes, how can we improve productivity through information? And that brings me to the second aspect of information in my discussion today: productivity and information. The real value of information, given its characteristics, lies only in its use as a source of knowledge. Very little information is of a truly proprietary nature. So those who market information without a value-added service are subject entirely to market whims, as with any other commodity. Adding uniqueness through a value-added service, through creating knowledge, enhances both productivity and profitability. Improving productivity depends on factors like precision, timeliness, and above all, appropriateness. In the information age, these concepts are redefining the meaning as well as the application of the word productivity. Take timeliness, for example. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said, "Knowledge keeps no better than fish." And for certain kinds of information, he was right. Stockbrokers make thousands of buy and sell decisions on the basis of an almost constant stream of timely information. Within hours, that same information is virtually worthless data except as history in tomorrow's financial newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. To take a different example of productivity, let's look at productivity in the manufacturing sector. The efficiency of manufacture became a key issue during the 1970s and remains so into the 1980s. The very word productivity has become a driving force in most developed and developing countries because implied in that one word has been productivity of the manufacturing sector. And there's no doubt that information systems, means and methods for internally generating information, will continue to improve dramatically the productivity of the manufacturing industry. In spite of the major social upheavals surrounding it, the introduction of robotics and automation are and will continue to have significant impact. Products will come out of factories in quantities and at costs in magnitudes unknown today. This implies change in related sectors, in services sectors like distribution, in the need for timeliness of market information, feedback on buying habits, stocking requirements. The need for these will be magnified as the output of the production lines multiplies. The large volumes will supply markets so quickly that product lives will then be shortened. Once this occurs, demand will increase for new products, and the timeliness of market research information will become more critical as the time for trial marketing is reduced. Now, product definition, of course, or desire for product won't help unless there's timely design and development. And the pressure for mechanical products, at least, will be on computerized product simulation, as the time needed for physical prototyping simply becomes unrealistic and the process becomes too expensive. Now, since most products are built from subassemblies, the data that is made available when these subassemblies are simulated rather than built can give a tremendous productivity boost in the development of the higher order product. And the evolution of computer-aided design will give product designers this ability, and they will achieve factors of 2 to 10 in productivity improvement simply through the automation of the functions that they're performing today, the actual design of the pieces that they're working on. But quantum leaps in productivity will come through a different approach. Imagine an easily accessible database that contains the simulation of all parts that have already been designed. Now a designer needing any one of these parts or a similar one simply describes the characteristic of the part that he needs and retrieves it from a database. We don't now have factors of 2 to 10 improved productivity. We've eliminated the need for redesigning the part. Now, the company who originally created that part would be interested in providing the design to the database as a marketing aid. And they would have generated it as part of their normal manufacturing process. So they too would achieve incremental value with no added work. And that, to me, represents the power of the information age. I think this is one example of where timely availability of the appropriate information is the key. And so the productivity task in information is not just to increase volume. This will happen of its own. Processes such as computerized typesetting will contribute by 1985 to a 4 to 7 times increase in the volume of print information available over just a few years ago. The productivity task is selection. The challenge for electronic publishers who provide online databases will be to provide networks and mechanisms for sorting through the information and for selecting and distributing it via the most effective medium. And this brings me to my third major point, the ways in which information can be transformed to knowledge through information services. Estimates vary, but a recently published study by Knowledge Industry Publications shows that in the United States, online database revenue grew 30% in 1982 to $905 million. And they're expected to grow another 26% to over $1 billion this year. Those revenues were produced by some 213 vendors providing 1,350 online databases, with another 1,000 available in Europe. And this represents an increase of 25% in vendors and 31% in databases over the previous year. The study found that the primary market for online databases has been in the business and professional users, who provided $870 million of the revenue in 1982 and are expected to spend $1.07 billion this year. Now, the general consumer market accounted for only $35 million last year, but on the other hand, it doubled to $70 million this year. Despite this growth, which is significant, the online database segment remains a very small portion of the information publishing industry, and it is expected to remain so for some time. The total industry's United States 1982 revenues totaled $44 billion. Almost 3/4 of that came from newspapers, periodicals, and print databases. Print databases, which are computer-compiled collections of information distributed in print form, had revenues of over $2 billion in 1982 and are expected to increase 10% this year. A Frost & Sullivan report on growth in the European online market forecasts that total database revenues in Europe will grow from $300 million in 1982 to almost $900 million in 1987. Now, online databases, sorting and selecting information, really represent only one example of value-added services that are employed to increase the productivity of information. In 1982, expenditures for total computer software and services in the United States passed $25 billion. According to the calculations of Input, a California-based research firm, this number could triple over the next 3 years. Now, all of these computer-related expenses, of course, have to do with the manipulation of information. As an industry at the center of creating new wealth, predictions of growth in information services have been and remain powerful incentives for attracting new entries and new investment. But like any other, this industry doesn't just produce winners. There are many factors influencing success. In a recent report on online database publishers, Forbes magazine correspondent Jeff Bliscoe wrote, "Excitement aside, few are making much money in this glamour business." A report recounts the 10-year experiment of the New York Times running database computers, which ended with $10 million in losses. Wharton Econometric Forecasting lost the same amount in only 3 years. Normal startup costs are part of the problem, according to Forbes, but a fundamental misjudgment of the market may be as much to blame. Database publishing is so new Almost everyone is flying blind. There is a trap here, explains Robert Weissman, who runs Dun & Bradstreet's information service. Companies are offering the new technology simply because it's exciting. The Times Project, argues Forbes, failed because its offerings suffered in comparison to services that offered multiple news publications. The Times venture was like setting up a 24-hour newsstand for one publication. On the other hand, even the competitive offerings are selling the automation of access to data that is already readily available in other formats. Now let's look at this more closely. Information services will evolve into numerous forms, and each will succeed or fail for different reasons. Terminals may replace paper as a medium, but it will be based on delivery issues like timeliness and cost. And it will not happen until the ease and comfort of use of this medium meets that of paper, and when the cost drops below it. Those factors don't exist today for many types of information. Your local newspaper still costs about 25 cents, and it can still be wrapped and put in your paper to take on the commuting train with you. Access to a computer runs, at a minimum, about $5 an hour. And even this price, which may not seem low compared to the 25-cent cost of a newspaper, is very low compared to the cost of delivering this service today, and it is really possible because the machine is accessed at night or perhaps is taking advantage of an existing network. Now this will change as technology moves on. The provision of data this way will become economical. And when it does, the novelty of access will wear off, and it will be the value of the information that will remain the key. Many companies will choose to lose money while waiting for those costs to drop, because that's the way they can position themselves for the future that they know is coming. On the other hand, the president of United States-based Digital Video Corporation advised, sell the steak and not the sizzle. In other words, don't get too wrapped up in the latest technology to the exclusion of utility. There are other forms of information services that have intrinsic value beyond the medium of delivery, and those are the ones that excite me. They lie in the delivery of knowledge, in the delivery of information which the customer does not know how to generate or doesn't want to generate, or information that becomes desirable to a business simply because the competition or the users have it. For example, if your competitors know how many people are watching your television program, then you need to know also if you're the television station manager. And so this knowledge business will be based on data that is volatile in nature. That has been the focus of information services growth in the most successful areas like financial, forecasting, and the travel industry, where online database publishing has had its greatest success, and especially when the systems are interactive and allow for customer transactions. But even knowledge services must be easy to use to be effective. A recent survey of the European online database users found that data professionals continue to be the major users of the services. It should be no surprise then that many of the services continue to frustrate non-data professionals. Now there are exceptions, such as Control Data's Videotex service here in Australia called Cybertel, and I'll tell you more about Videotex services later. Now much has been written about the need for creating user-friendly services for delivering information, and we would all agree that this is key. What it boils down to is designing services that allow the ultimate user of information, a person who is rarely a data professional, to take back the responsibility and the control over the access and the application of the information. One approach to this, which is used by some highly successful services, like a company called Find SVP in the United States, is to integrate a voice-over telephone line into the process. So questions are taken over the phone and responses are given in the same manner. Other times, a more comprehensive solution is needed. Take, for example, the corporate world. The current frustrating run of information from the terminal to the boardroom to the meeting has led more than one manager to install a personal computer. Now, that personal computer is very rarely compatible with the company's other information systems. As a result, it soon gathers as much dust as the bound information reports that are stacked in corners throughout business offices. Now, it may have a brief revival when the owner discovers external information services. But really, the whole concept will not succeed until all three of those are well integrated. Now, our objective should not be to make every business person a data professional. It should be to integrate the data professionals into the business world and improve the odds that the ultimate user of information will be able to ask for and get what they need. Such integration is a value-added consulting service which is much in demand. And the task is to tie together, to link first the local manager's information to the corporate system, and then to link that information to external data, which will then provide the manager with transparent tools to manage the business. Now, when the telephone was introduced, neighbors gathered in anticipation of a call. It was a novelty. Soon they changed their focus. The focus was not on the telephone, it was on the information being transmitted. And so the telephone became transparent. And that's the concept of transparency that I mean when I say our information services become transparent. The information has to transcend its medium. Now, as providers of user-friendly services, then, this is our goal: to focus on the creation of knowledge rather than on the latest means of delivering the information. Of course, we'll have to use the latest means to make it affordable. Milton Bryce, who was one of the pioneers in the United States in computers, declared recently, "If companies built bridges the way they have built information systems for the past 2 decades, this nation would be one of ferry boats." He was referring, of course, to our continuing inability to generate effective internal information. The point for those of us in information services trying to provide external information is that we have a long way to go in the effective delivery of external information when we don't even know how to use the internal information that is being generated in every company. In fact, making progress in information systems can open up a whole new series of services. Let's look, for example, at the travel industry. Consider a closed group, a user base of travel agents, airlines, hotels, and resorts. A likely application is the provision of flight schedules and pricing information. A second application would be the booking of travel by the agents. Now, these applications are well known, and they're implemented all over the world. But now consider the incremental opportunities that marketing this information can bring. The data concerning which bookings are being made can be extremely valuable for a variety of information services. Trends in travel are critical to airlines, hotels, countries dependent on tourism, restaurants, tour planners, a myriad of others. And so the information here is generated by the previous information service. The key, though, is providing the link for turning the inside data into outside data. The data inside the reservation service, the transactions themselves, can be used to create new output and new knowledge. This is an example of a potentially powerful information service that is very rarely in place today. Another one would be a computerized shopping service, which could also retain the information of which products are being bought. As we've seen, some of the key characteristics of successful knowledge services include ease of use, access to volatile information, linkage of internal information to external information, the creation of new levels of information, and the ability to tailor information to the user's need. Now I'd like to look at some examples of existing data services. My company is Control Data, a $4 billion United States-based worldwide company operating in 4 major areas: computer services, computer systems, peripheral products, and financial services. Our computer-related services include data services, consulting, education, and small business services. At the beginning of 1983, we offered more than 40 externally marketed databases in the United States. Our international databases are also numerous, and they're generally unique to the country that they're offered in. Now let me describe some of our information services offerings. One of our services is known as X Market, and it addresses a market similar to that of the Dun & Bradstreet service. It is an online service with a database of detailed information on 500,000 United States business establishments that have 20 or more employees. It is marketed to businesses and governments as a way for understanding their markets. When combined with an input-output model, it enables a company to examine customer profiles, measure penetration in their field, and to visualize geographically the geographic concentration of their markets. Now, it is the value that is generated by the model that enhances the worth of the database. Retrieving information about customers or competitors is a key function of this service. But the incremental ability to analyze the implications of the data on their business gives it a value that no print media can achieve. In addition, our customers can use this online system to link together our externally provided information with their internally generated information about their own customer base. For example, a customer can track his performance against the potential market, and they can gauge their market penetration. At a minimum, this allows them to set timely performance goals. More importantly, they can build customer profiles for various levels of penetration. And this range of capabilities makes that service unique. Another United States-based information service of ours is called Arbitron. Now, you may have heard of it or the similar Nielsen television rating service. Arbitron is a service that has transcended the issue of its medium. It is rarely thought of as a database service, and it's certainly never cited in the database-oriented studies. Yet data collection is its most basic function. Among other services, Arbitron measures the radio listening habits of a random group of Americans. The resultant data becomes critical to the radio station managers in setting advertising rates. Now, here is an example of data that becomes critical information because the company's competitors and customers have access to it. Advertising rates are set based on listener market size. So services like Arbitron and the Nielsen rating service and the local services you have in Australia provide information that is invaluable to all the involved groups. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Control Data's video text service here in Australia is called Cybertel. This is a local application, and it's based on the widely known Prestel service. It is also the first video text service operational in this country. As a video text system, it requires no computer knowledge on the part of the user. It's adaptable to a television screen, and it transmits over regular telephone lines. Information is stored on the computer by companies as diverse as General Motors Holden and Jet Set Tours. Now, the principal advantages of the video text system are found in its low cost and in its friendliness to the user. As has been written, what makes it special is its ease of use. For the first time, we have a very real opportunity to put the power of a computer at the fingertips of virtually everyone in the country. As an example, the French government will use video text in a unique way. The government plans to distribute free Minitel video text terminals, 9-inch black and white video monitors with full alphanumeric keyboard, to telephone users throughout France. The immediate rationale behind the giveaway is to save money. The French plan to offer an electronic phone directory, and they claim that the cost of the terminals will be offset by the savings from printing far fewer phone books. Now, in time, I'm sure that they're right. Cybertel here has gained good penetration in several business markets, including travel and finance, where it provides access to vital but otherwise hard to get information. Many business federations and large corporate organizations are likely prospects for dial-up financial information needed by treasurers and banking officers. Video text is better presented on specially designed terminals than on the average television screen, and as the cost of terminals decreases, one would expect less reliance on the television screen. On the other hand, the television manufacturers may find reason to redesign their presentation ability. Additionally, it could be imagined that banks who offer video text transactional services could also offer video text adapters as part of the service, much as they once offered toasters. The danger confronting video text is not in user-friendliness, as it is with most other systems. It is, however, in its usefulness. As Digital's president warned, it can be oversold. The role of video text in the overall scheme of information services will depend on the applications meeting the customer's needs for information and transactions. Its limitations are in storing customer-generated information and in linking this with external information. In Cybertel, we will offer some key capabilities in this area that make it more than a video text service and overcome some of these issues. Cybertel users will have immediate and transparent access to selected applications on Control Data's CyberNet remote computing service. Backed by our large-scale cybercomputer systems, the users can then link their internal data to the service. Linkage to the user's own computers are also available. In cooperation with the Reader's Digest, Control Data in the United States operates an online computer information network known as The Source. The Source and its competitors, such as CompuServe Information Services, provide two-way communications via personal computer. The Source has about 40,000 customers in the United States and 23 other countries, and is growing at about 2,000 users every month. It is accessible from virtually any computer terminal or personal computer. The source's main menu includes news and reference resources, business and financial markets, catalog shopping, and others. And it will soon feature a value-added service, Control Data's computer-based learning system, Plato. Now, with all of these services, what I find most surprising is the large number of customers who use the system to talk to each other via electronic mail. The source, like many other information services, has really just begun its development. But it does appear to promise equal measures of friendliness and utility, and that's a combination that offers real value to the customer. It can also ride on Control Data's existing networks and computers to reduce costs. And since it is a consumer service, it's primarily used at night, again reducing the cost. Outside of Control Data, other examples provide insight into successful information services. Being first, for example, still counts, and it's being proved in the United States airline industry. Some time ago, groups of United States airlines, visionaries if you will, established information systems of their own, and they installed terminals as service. Groups of United States airlines established information systems of their own and installed terminals as services in nearly 2/3 of the travel agents' offices in the United States. Now, when a travel agent requests flight information, the first listing to appear on the terminal will be the availability of the host airline, the airline that is put in the system. Now, in the airline industry, the first airline listed on a multi-airline trip becomes the ticketing airline. As the ticketing airline, it is the one that receives the customer's payment. Now, while the ticketing airline does pass on the proper portions of payment to the other airlines involved, the average time they hold payment is 53 days. Now, according to a Business Week report, that amounts to $350 million in interest every year. So there's your reward for the innovator. In a similar way, Reuters dominates the financial services market because of its role as an information pioneer. Information services were introduced internationally by Reuters in 1964 when it purchased the non-U.S. rights to Altronics Corporation's stock quotation service. Today, Reuters has over 30,000 terminals installed worldwide, and it commands 17% of the European database information market and a far more commanding share of the market in financial information. It followed the 1964 introduction of the Stockmaster service in 1967 with VideoMaster, presenting on a terminal everything from stocks to commodities. In 1971, following the Smithsonian agreement that ended fixed exchange rates, Reuters moved into a whole new area with the Reuter Monitor in 1973. And now it has a real-time information retrieval service for its existing clients and banks. Now, what's the significance of this? Well, stock markets have floors, and so do commodities. But the floor for money exchange today is a terminal. And it was also extended to oil and to gold. And so the Reuters terminal has become the principal means of exchange for investment and banking throughout the world. In 1981, Reuters introduced the monitor dealing, which added the ability for online transactions and further strengthened its hold on the market, not just for financial information, but for financial dealings. There are, however, risks as well as rewards in being first. The United States Airlines, who so wisely invested in information systems, are today under Justice Department investigation for antitrust activities. In several cases, the first airlines have had to adjust their system to include new participants and at the same time to compensate the non-participants. In the Reuters case, As a text system, their analog rather than digital presentation of information may present limits to the ultimate usefulness of that information, because linking analog data to internally generated digital data is no easy task. Another Reuters problem, or perhaps a breakthrough, is the fact that it relies on the participating banks to update the information on the system. Now, on the one hand, they may not be presenting the most complete or current information, since that depends on its client. On the other hand, having a customer do your updating while paying for your service has a lot to say for it. In changing times, the demand is greatest for services which see around the corner, which give us future vision. And some publishing firms are changing the nature of their business to try and do that. McGraw-Hill, the international publishing firm, has long enjoyed strategic marketing dominance in the United States in business publications and in educational materials. In the late 1970s, management was developing computer-based learning systems to expand its business. Then, 3 years ago, they acquired Data Resources, Inc., DRI, who are the pioneers in econometric modeling. Thus, McGraw-Hill is not just waiting for the cost of the medium to drop. They're aggressively pursuing new and different information opportunities. Services like DRI offer businesses and governments what they need to envision the future. If war expands in Iraq or OPEC production increases, an online system will allow Exxon or France to see how the new developments affect its own future. For the most part, these services have two principal strengths. First, the information is tailored to the specific company or country. And second, the service's economic assumptions allow a company to conduct a regression analysis, and thus they can project how a changing business strategy would impact their current business given certain economic forecasts. Some services are now also introducing computer software for small firms, which will allow them to conduct at a reasonable cost a smaller forecasting and simulation. Let me reiterate then the three main points about information. First, it is a new and critical resource. Second, productivity can be improved through information. And third, information can be transformed into knowledge through information services. Our information industry is indeed evolving and growing. We can get clear of the information swamp by improving the productivity of information. And information services is a principal means by which productivity is enhanced. Marketplace competition will sort out the winners, based, I believe, on the value-added services provided to the customer. These services will both enhance the user-friendliness and the utility. Linking together internally and externally generated information is a key opportunity for the growth of information services. And being first will continue to offer benefits as long as one keeps looking ahead. When the Chinese thought of living in interesting times as a curse, they were not so fortunate, as Bell rightly pointed out, as to understand the implications of changing times, something we might call the exercise of future sight. Now we have no excuses, only an opportunity to use the information services tools at our disposal to turn our resources of information into the new wealth of knowledge. Now, paring down the enormity of that task, a personal challenge to each of you would be to search your own environment for hidden information and to sort out such information which will make us more knowledgeable agents for change in our own industry. And certainly, this is the chief purpose of the Australian Computer Conference. As it is often said, the opportunity for advancement is not a straight line course. We should maximize our understanding of the new information technologies and be willing to experiment and take risks so that we may profit in full measure from this new wealth, information services. Thank you.
Well, I know you'll agree with me that that was an excellent presentation. A lot of people here are, in fact, on the production side of DP services, and it's interesting to hear someone speak on the consumer side and also present a refreshing approach to the economics of information. We will have a short question period. Those of you who are interested in asking questions, will you please go to the microphone in the middle of the hall, and will you identify yourself by giving your name and your institution. Thank you very much. Also, I should point out that this morning's session should end at 10:25, and I would like to make a brief presentation to our speaker before it does. Thank you.
Well, there doesn't seem to be a grand rush to the microphone.
Fred Bendai, Australian Reinsurance. Are you concerned that we may be destroying our own credibility by overselling, by offering to produce something and then next year it isn't there?
I guess there is some risk of that, but I believe the alternative risk is to be so cautious that we really prevent the growth of the business. There have been a number of offerings that get put up, and then it turns out nobody's interested in that database, and so the next year it disappears. But I think that would be the only way that we discover what people will use. As I mentioned with the source, it was not anybody's expectation that a primary usage would be electronic mail. And yet that is what the users are doing. And I think the experimentation is necessary, and it has to be the customer that tells us what's useful. So if we don't put it up, we won't know. Any other questions, thoughts?
Peter Croft from Justice Information System in South Australia. Where does privacy type legislation fit into your scheme of things?
Well, it plays a major role in the scheme of things. I think it'll be a critical issue in this whole area. In the United States, as I mentioned earlier, and in every country, there are lots of laws being developed on what information can be stored, who can have access to it. I think one of the key services that can be provided by information services will not involve the invasion of privacy. I think it's random data and statistics that are really the key that are being looked for, and not the invasion of an individual's privacy. Now, obviously, the storing of information on a data bank, unless efforts are made to prevent access from undesirable people, can open up a lot of risks. And I think that in terms of personal information databases, that will probably be the slowest growing market, because we'll have to evolve and learn how to put the protection in, how much protection is needed, how to prevent access to it. And I'm sure all of you have been in the computer industry long enough to know that with a will, you can break into virtually any database. And so it'll really be what information is stored that I think is more important than even how well protected it is.
Actually, if I may, I would like to ask a question or two. One relates to, you mentioned that shortened product lives would enable more and more items to be produced. How does this figure into your calculations in terms of market saturation?
Well, It's really the market saturation which will force a shorter product life. If a product can be produced in vast quantity, the price will first of all drop, which will make it more accessible to a larger number of people. And once everybody has bought one, you need a new toy to sell. And so it's really the market force will create the need for a product to be developed more quickly. And then the information services can help you develop those products more quickly.
Noel Maverick of David Simon Company Limited. A gentleman from the Justice Department of South Australia came across an interesting question, which is invasion of privacy. I would like you to address the issue of concentrated power. Information itself is a very powerful weapon in the hands of governments, in the hands of a few big computer installations and so forth. It's a big stick. How do you see this being tackled in the United States?
I guess one of the key issues to me is the issue of a free society, an open society versus a closed one. And I know there's a fear in many underdeveloped countries that in fact the developed countries, through acquisition of information, will expand their power over those that don't have it. The thing that I think is key to this, and certainly as a provider of information, we are very aware of it in Control Data and any other major corporation in the free world, is that because we are so oriented to our users and our consumers, and because there is such an open market for competition, I don't believe the opportunity for hoarding information will truly exist. And I think, when I talked about the characteristics of information, I think information itself will prevent the hoarding of information, the withholding of it from people who need it, from people who can use it effectively.
Honesty is the best course then?
Excuse me?
You're saying honesty will be the best course?
I guess, well, that's would be a little bit too motherhood and apple pie for me to say. I don't think it's honesty necessarily. I think there is more control than that. I think it is the free market that will really provide that protection.
Hope you're right.
Yes.
I'll have to ask Virginia to call you up because I can't see you.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not much better off.
Having lost my contact lens early on.
My name is Rosemary Grabo and I work for the federal government. I was wondering, with a system such as Arbitron, which measures radio listening habits, if you have any problems with ratings being overemphasised for things like television programs?
You mean, does the rating play too great a role in which television program is put on?
Yes, and the
Well,
type of television program.
Yeah. In the United States, I think the best way to address that is the fact that we have alternate mechanisms. There are a number of television stations that run strictly based on financing by advertising. And I would suggest that in those areas, you may get the problem that you're talking about. And I think your concern is over educational material or other judgment factors being used. We also have in the United States what we call public television stations, which are funded through fund gathering, through various private institutions. They do not depend on advertising, and I believe that is where you get more of the quality input into the programming. I don't know if that's an adequate answer. We also have cable television, which provides up to 150 channels today, and much of that is totally independent of advertising. So what you're asking is a basic consumer issue of Americana, and not one that is really impacted either way by the fact that the information is there, I believe.
To a certain extent, I'm wondering whether these private television companies that you're talking about, who don't depend on advertising rates, have much of the market in the television industry and much of an impact.
They didn't used to, and the market is growing dramatically. I think the American public is getting a little tired of the drivel that they're choosing to watch.
Yeah.
excuse me for that commentary.
We've got 2 more questions, and then I think that's the end of the session.
Alex Reid, University of Western Australia. You've described a number of different information services, Videotex, The Source, Reuters, and so on, all of which are being developed in a disjoint fashion and not able to be integrated. Well, even Videotex, for example, has got 2 incompatible formats that are available worldwide. At least, yes. Do you think it important that these things do be integrated, and if so, how will they be integrated in time?
I guess I believe it is an important thing to integrate them. I do not envision in the next 15 years that a worldwide standard will exist. There are some things going on today that are accomplishing that. There are companies, at least in the United States, who develop a terminal that has a universal interface. And in fact, there is one that if you go into the banking houses in the United States, right on the market floor, there will be, instead of a Reuters terminal, it will actually be the universal screen. And the universal screen can be programmed to either show the Reuters screen, the Apple computer sitting next to it, a completely different interface. So I think there are mechanical solutions to the problem you're talking about. Now, as I mentioned, Reuters would still have a problem if you wanted to integrate the data on the screen because of its analog nature. But I think technology will overcome that rather than forcing us to wait for everybody to agree on a standard. We've all been waiting for standards in this industry for many years.
Thank you.
Your point about the nature of the...
Please identify yourself.
Albert Langer, no institution.
Thank you.
Your point about the nature of information as a public good and as inherently shareable and so on seems to be very important, but I'd suggest it applies to the value-added services as well, that software itself is information, is shareable, ought to be distributed free. The logical way to develop those value-added services is for the value-added to be zero, as in the case of the French telephone directory, that if you can even install terminals in travel agents on just the interest rate on the float, it seems logical that in developing all these services, a market economy isn't the appropriate way, that it's the same approach should be taken as with the education system or national broadcasting in Australia or roads, a whole range of services which are provided as public services free of charge. And that seems logical for the value-added services as well as the underlying database.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting how quickly the discussion of information moves to the discussion of privacy or politics or any other field, and that's what you're discussing. And I choose to disagree. I don't think there is anything free. The French are paying enormously for their experiment. Every person who doesn't have a terminal is paying just as much as every person who does, and it is not a bargain today. The French government happens to be committed to the future of that. I think they're very wise and very visionary, but it is far from free. And I do think the market economy will guarantee that when there is no subsidy, that terminal won't show up at your door until it's truly affordable, until it's truly the cheapest way to go. And then I think the largest number of people will be able to afford it. Because if your average person is subsidizing the French government's terminal program, then that is something, that is using some money that is preventing them from gaining access to some other information.
France, like every other Western country, has something like 90% telephone penetration, and that means a similar penetration of phone directories and a similar penetration of terminals. I mean, we're looking towards a world where there would be a terminal in every home, or where there would be.
I agree, and I think that's very desirable, and I'm just suggesting that there are different ways to get there. France's experiment is a very good one. Other countries will choose.
It's certainly a market economy, but with a different approach.
So that we can finish the session on time, Albert, I'd really like you to perhaps take up these issues with our speaker after the session. Albert, in fact, is very well informed on the subject of telecommunications and the social implications of these. However, I would now like to make the presentation. I'm sorry we're running slightly over time. That was a genuine offer too. I've been told to say that on behalf of the Computer Society, I would like you, Tania, to accept this small token. I think, in fact, it's a rather bulky token.
Fit my suitcase easily.
of our appreciation for preparing and presenting so eloquently today this keynote address, and I'm sure that all of those present will agree with me that your presentation has certainly enhanced the quality of the conference overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more item before we break, and I almost forgot this. I would like to say thank you to Control Data, who made it possible for Tania to be here. I believe they're working her to death, but thank you for your support too.
Oh, really?
I think I've seen you somewhere before. Were you at the James Martin seminar a couple of years ago?